Okay, thank you for joining us today for the presentation of the new features included in TreeAge Pro 2021. Many of the features are specifically for the healthcare module or the healthcare version of our software. There will be a couple of them also apply to the business version, but we'll cover not all of them, but the most important ones today. Again, please use the chat for questions, and I'll try to take them as I can. We're going to start with our, what we think is one of the most important things that we've added, which is budget impact analysis. And, budget impact analysis kind of allows you to assess what the cost impact will be to the health system or to a payer based on a new treatment. And we've been getting requests for quite a long time to add this as a feature to TreeAge Pro, and we finally did it with this release. While TreeAge Pro is typically used for cost effectiveness models, with especially Markov models, well, only Markov models, you might want to see, okay, what's the impact in the first year, in the second year, the third year, and how is that going to affect our budget as a payer if we switch over from, potentially to a more expensive treatment. So let's take a look. And we'll just use one of the models that comes with the software. This files view has all the example models in it, and this budget impact Markov right here, which I'm going to open up. And if we look at the payoffs, because sometimes budget impact may split costs into different components. So this model actually has 3 component payoffs for cost. It has overall cost, and then it has chemo med cost and hospital costs separated out. Now, you certainly don't have to do that, but I just wanted to make the point that you may actually have budgetary impacts on different systems that pay for different components of the cost, and that's what we have in this particular model. So we have a model, we've done our cost effectiveness analysis. Now we're trying to kind of justify the switch in treatment, let's say from standard care to new treatment, and we want to see what's it going to do to the budget. So there's a new view for that. We go to views, budget impact, and you don't really have to do anything major to your model. Your model's already in place. It already has Markov components. It already has costs being accumulated over time. All we're going to do is generate that data by year and export it. So in my budget impact view, I'm going to choose the cost payoff and then the 2 component costs, just because I'm interested. I happen to be interested in that breakdown. So these are the cost outputs or payoffs that I want included in the exported data. And now I go to the time period and I want the first 5 years. So we made it so you could do that very quickly. Oops, sorry, switch to views. Just say I want the first year, and starting the first year for 5 total years, and it breaks it down into stage 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are the first 5 years. So I have my payoffs defined, I have my time periods defined, and I just run the analysis. And this is a cohort model, so I can just do cohort analysis, and it generates the cost by year for each of the 3 outputs. So remember, I asked for these 3 outputs and I asked for these 5 years, and it's generated all the data. Now, one note I want to make here is this will not match exactly what you see in the cohort analysis, because we literally run the model for a single year, we run the model for 2 years and then subtract out the first year, we run the model for 3 years, etc., because there is an impact of half cycle correction that would be incorrect if we just reported back the Markov cohort results. So we actually run the model 5 times in this case to generate this data. And of course, you can review it here, but typically that data would then be factoring into a budget impact model, which would typically be done in Excel. So we have a button here to export that data to Excel. And it's just the data, right? We got one sheet for the first strategy, another sheet for the second strategy, and these cells are all named. So they're easy to work with, right? So I know this is, payoff 3, year 3 is this, and you can reference these cells in your calculations. Now, along with your software, we've also provided an example budget impact worksheet. Now, this is certainly not necessarily exactly what you want, but in this particular one that we developed based on this exported data, it shows a cascading movement from one treatment to another a little bit at a time. And this is the patients. And then down here, you see, for example, here, it's pulling in that data, that strategy 1, payoff 1, year 1 data directly from this exported data. I don't want to break that. So your exported data was here, and we just built an example, a budget impact model on top of that to show over time what is the budget impact to your system. And we won't go through this whole worksheet, but it comes with your software, so you can look at it anytime you want. But the idea being, we know that you have work to build the budget impact that fits your needs. What we don't want you to have to do is run a whole bunch of individual uh, analyses of your model one at a time, changing values in the model in terms of the time frame, and do that all manually. Now it's basically a one-step process to generate this data, which can become the source data for something that's more complicated, like this. I'll see if there's any questions. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and continue on to the next topic. So the next topic, it has to do with building model outputs. And there's really two forms of that building model of outputs. And for now, I will just close this. I don't need that anymore. And I don't need this. And you'll see that I'll demonstrate both. One has to do with tracking time and state, which you'd use for calibration. And the other has to do with kind of splitting the cost, which we already done in that prior model. But if you ever have a situation where you want to copy full values from one payoff to another, or split cost into two, you can use this feature. So anyway, let's go ahead and start. And I'm going to just use this. I'm going to use a decision tree, but typically you do this on a Markov model. But I'm going to just take this CE decision tree. It's a very simple model, just 2 strategies, 4 payoffs. And I'm going to go up here to tree, build model outputs. And the first, there's 2 flavors of that. But we'll start with the first one, copying existing payoffs to new payoffs. So in essence, in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to take the cost payoff and split it into treatment cost and follow-up cost. So what does it do? It's going to run through all the payoffs at all the terminal nodes and show me all the entries for payoff 1 and allow me to copy or component parts or all of that to payoffs 3 and 4. Okay. And again, if it were a Markov model, it wouldn't be terminal node payoffs. It would be Markov rewards at states or at events. So here it is. Here's my first entries of payoffs at a terminal node, and I'm just going to copy it to both. And because I only want the initial treatment for payoff 3, I'm going to delete out the follow-up treatment for that. And for payoff 4, I only want the follow-up, so I'm going to delete out the initial treatment. And then I just move to the next entry, right? Copy and copy, and I do the same thing. I'm just going to delete out the components that I don't want. You could also use this if you wanted the same payoff reported discounted and undiscounted. You could just copy everything, turn on discounting for one, don't turn on discounting for the other. And then it's just going to walk through. There's only 4 of them. Right? There's my initial treatment. There's my follow-up treatment. And then this is the last one. And now I've finished all, there's no more. I've gone through all of the places where there's data for payoff 1. And now I click generate. And now if I look at my payoffs, you see I've copied the initial treatment to payoff 3, the follow-up treatment is payoff 4. And if I ran rankings on this model, I would see not just the overall cost, but the cost broken down into the 2 components. So that's one flavor of the build model outputs. Just checking for questions. No questions. Okay, great. The other flavor of the build model outputs, I'll just not save this, has to do with tracking time and state. And for that example, we're going to use another model that I already have set up with the payoffs established, like in the tree preferences. They just haven't been populated because we're not going to spend the time going to tree preferences and adding the payoffs, because that's pretty straightforward. But they are there. If I go to tree preferences, you will see that yes, it does have 7 payoffs. And yes, I am going to use this I won't do both of them, but I'll do it to do the overall survival at 5 years. That's what I'm going to do. So here's my model. I go to the same place, tree, build model outputs, but this time I'm going to record time and state in a new payoff. I'm going to store that data in payoff 7. I want 5-year survival. So I want to know how many people are in my non-dead health states at the beginning of stage 5, right? So 4 cycles have passed when you hit start the beginning of stage 5. So 5-year survival means that. And I want overall survival. So I want both my non-dead states, but I certainly don't want the dead included. And that's all I have to do. I just click generate. And if I look at my model here, I'm going to go to the Markov info view and look at the health states. You'll see down towards the bottom, I need to make this bigger. Down here for both the local cancer and metastasis state, it says stage equals 5. And what that's going to do is that condition is going to return a 1. So this will only return a 1 for stage 5. So it will only report back the percentage of the cohort in those states, stage 5 only. Now, how will that show up in my results? Well, in my cohort analysis, I can check the results. I'll run the cohort. This is not part of the new feature. I just go down to stage 5 and I see, okay, here are the people who are still alive, about 0.845 approximately. 844, 845. That's approximately how many people are alive after 5 years. But now with that payoff builder, what I've done is I've made that into a model output. So if I just run rankings, there's my 0.845 for the first strategy and a little higher for the second strategy. And now I have the 5-year overall survival, and I could go back and do it for progression free, but I'm not going to do that. But the overall survival, 5-year survival, which I might then use to calibrate the model. Okay, so those are the two flavors of the build model outputs. One is to generate new payoff entries, that are based on prior payoff entries that exist, maybe splitting costs or maybe copying something. And then the other one is for tracking time and state, either for at a specific time or over a period of time. And that's it for the payoff builder. I don't see any questions, so I will continue from there. The third thing we'll cover is running TreeAge analyses from Excel. And this came from some a request from customers, and I'll just start to close some of these things. And we have a special features. We're going to open this, and admittedly, it's a little bit tricky to get it set up. But what we want is this Markov cancer biolinks with buttons. So we have an underlying Markov model here. But what we want to do is we want to give this to someone who doesn't know anything about TreeAge Pro, who only knows Excel. This is doing all the work, but we have an Excel front end that has inputs and outputs. Let me just see it. Okay, good. I want to make sure it's working. So what you could do is you could build a model in TreeAge Pro. You give it to someone with the worksheet and the TreeAge Pro model. They can see the pathways in here, but they don't need to know anything about running analyses. They would have to have TreeAge Pro installed, admittedly, but they wouldn't have to know anything about running analyses. And now on our front end, we have a bunch of model inputs, right? And these are linked into the model. This isn't new. This has existed for a long time. If you want to know how that's set up, it's set up here in Tree Preferences, Spreadsheet, Dynamic Links. And in this model, we have outputs from TreeAge Pro to Excel and back. And so now that I have the button set up, if I go back to Excel, I can change an input. So let me just change this to, let's say, 25,000, which should increase the ICER because the second strategy will be more expensive. It's also more effective. And now I can rerun the model. And you see the ICER has gone up. And I can go back and I can change it, let's say, back to 21,000. I should see the ICER go down. And I go back and run the rankings. And sure enough, it's recalculating the model. That's happening back here, but it's reporting the results here. And with microsimulation, and it's not super fancy. It only reports final model values. It's not doing like, 5-year survival unless you created a payoff for that. It's reporting, your final results, cost and quality per patient. And of course, if I run microsimulation, if it were patient simulation model, then I really, even if I don't change any values, I'm getting slightly different results every time because I'm running patients through and there's some randomness to the process. This is really about sharing models with people that don't know how to use TreeAge Pro, don't want to know how to use TreeAge Pro, but they need the model that's in TreeAge Pro. And that's what that's about. Still no questions, so I will continue on to the next topic, which is new graphs. Now, admittedly, we don't have very many new graphs. We're building new graphs because I know that we've received the desire on your part as customers to have, prettier, more dynamic graphs that are easier to edit. So we've built the architecture to build those graphs. We only have a couple of them done, but I want to show you what one of them looks like, and we'll just slowly roll out more and more of our graphs in the new architecture. So I'm just gonna, one of them is the ICE scatter plot. So I'm just gonna open up an example model from my old training examples. This is simply a, nope, that's not what I wanted, sorry. I wanted this one. This is just a simple decision tree for which I'm going to run probabilistic sensitivity analysis. So I'm measuring combined uncertainty, and the graph I want to show you, the new one, is the IC scatter. Now we've kept the old ones for now. We will eventually drop those, but here's the new one, and you see it's dynamically drawn. It's prettier. It can still export and all that, but not only the graphics are better, but we're making it a lot easier to edit it by having the edit options right here. So let's say I don't want the confidence ellipse, just take it off or put it back, right? I do or don't want the willingness to pay line, right? I don't, whatever these are things that are specific. I want to change the markers, etc. These are all things that are specific to an ICE scatter. Whereas there will be other things like axes where you'd be able to change that basically on any graph. So if I want to change, let's say, the y-axis to include the 0 point, I can just do that, and it will now include the 0 point. So we just wanted to make the graphs prettier and make them easier to edit, including the chart labels, right? So you got the chart title and you got the labels here, and maybe I'd want to put, qual here, and maybe I want to put, USD here. Just to make it a little bit clearer what we're looking at. So anyway, that's the first, and there's another one too, the state prob graph from Markov cohort, but the first couple of graphs that we've done, and we'll just continue to roll those out in both major and minor releases over the next, let's say, year or so. Okay, still no questions, so I'm just going to send a chat. Just to make sure that everyone knows if they have a question, they can send it. And I'll certainly take questions at the end as well. The last couple of things are also things that were requested by customers. So one is to compare models. So let's say you're working on a model and you maybe with a team and you want to remember kind of what was done, or you want to say, well, what did this person change? Now, I'm not going to tell you that this is pretty format, but it will show you what the changes were. So if I open up, I'm just going to open up this adjusted tree. And there's just a couple of things, like I updated text here. I changed a few values if I compare it to the not adjusted tree. But when you have a tree open, let's just say this is the most recent version. And I go up to tree, compare with another tree. And I take this one, which let's just say is a slightly older version of the same model. Obviously, you wouldn't compare two models for different projects. There'd be no reason for that. But if I choose that, then I know it's an ugly format. It's the XML format that our files take, but it does highlight what changed, right? This follow-up annual changed to 3,000, right? And I updated this text, and there was an extra 5,000 added here, and you can skip to the next and the next. So it'll highlight here intervals 7, where or the high value is 15 when before it was 12. So I know it's an ugly format. We're not trying to make this super fancy. We're just trying to give you a method to see what did someone change. Like, I'm not getting the same results, and I don't know what my colleague changed, and now you can see it. So that's what that is, the model comparison tool. Question, can you change the color of the highlight? I don't think so. It's not very fancy. You can skip around from one to the next. But you can't, what you can't do is adjust and send results from one to the next. That you definitely don't want to do, because there are changes on the files that are immaterial that we hide. So these files are not, this is really for reviewing. But it's not super fancy. It's just, here are the differences, do with them what you will. Okay, and then I think the last thing that we're gonna, second to last thing is the model comments, right? So the model comments, it's really just an option. It's a new view, comments, where you can, and I'll put it down here so it's easier to see, where if you were working with a colleague and let's say I wanted them to know what I did, I could just come in and say, okay, that's me. And what I did is I changed sensitivity analysis values, and I added background mortality. Let's just say, I know I didn't do that. Let's just use that as an example. And then just click OK. And then you would have this little audit trail. This was the date that was commented, and this was done. And you may need that. You may do that as a reminder to yourself, but more likely you'd use that when you were working on the same model with colleagues, and you wanted to be able to have a little bit of an audit trail back and forth in terms of what I did when I was doing that, as opposed to, let's say, my colleague Al was doing when he was working on it. So it's, again, not super fancy, just something that people wanted to be able to do that, because we were told that they were just keeping an associated document with just a list of changes. Seems like it might be nice to just put in the model. And this was certainly not difficult for us to do. Okay, questions? No questions there. So then the last thing that I'm going to show you is something that was requested, and this has to do with complex formulas in variable definitions. And for that, to illustrate that, I have another example model here. And it's kind of a silly function that I did. I basically just stuck a whole lot of ifs inside each other. So if we look at this variable and just look at this definition, I got a whole bunch of ifs, and this is basically unreadable. It's not wrong, it works, but that's very hard to read because you got an if inside another if, and another if, and another if, and another if, etc. But the new formatting option will basically put line spaces and etc. in, so it's much easier to use. So you got your outer if, and then you have another if, and it just indents. So when your formulas get really complicated with functions inside other functions, this is a lot easier to read. This looks a lot more like the way a programmer would do in programming code, just to make it easier to handle this kind of complex function. And you'd be surprised when you have the complex functions, something like this really will be useful. And that brings us to the end. So I think I've covered everything that I was hoping to. There are a couple of other small changes that weren't worth discussing today that you'll see in the help. But I'm open to any questions that people may have. Okay, well, I guess I'll wait just another minute, but I think we're good. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate the, your support as customers, and hope that you like the new changes, and please recommend new stuff, right? We do new versions every 6 months, and we're always looking for ideas. In fact, we may come right out and solicit ideas from some of you. So thank you for that, and we look forward to your feedback in the future. Okay, thank you for the nice words in the chat, and it doesn't seem like there's any more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close, and thank you all again.